So yesterday an interesting thing happened. A neighbor of mine came over, rang my doorbell and said he had a table that I could have because he sees my wife and I outside working on tables all the time. So he gave me this set for free. It's in pretty good condition. Has a leaf that flips out, which these are nice. People like to buy tables with leaves. It's got 4 chairs. I will be building a bench to go with it. Not sure which design I'm going to go with, but I've got a few ideas. Alright, so the next step is sanding. I've got to sand the top, sand the sides, sand the legs, sand the chairs, and I will get back with you when that is completed. Alright, so I like to start the sanding process with the belt sander. This is 80 grit sandpaper, just to remove the previous finish on the set. After that I'll move to a DeWalt orbital sander. Brand doesn't matter. One thing that I want to note is the wood grain direction on this table set is not long ways. It is short ways, I guess you would describe it. So I will also sand in that direction. Most tables have the wood grain long ways. Once I've taken off the bulk of the material with my belt sander, I brush off the dust. And run my orbital sander. This sander, I use a 150 grit typically on this next sanding step. So the top is fully sanded, and now I've got to sand these edges. Typically I'll just take a piece of 80 grit sandpaper . Alright, so now that the top is sanded, I like to move the table into an isolated room that is dust free. You don't want any dust on this tabletop when you stain it. It'll cause little bumps in the surface. Most of the time we will sand and paint the table skirt and legs before we stain the top. This table we will not be doing that because it is easily removable. The top has 2 little brackets that hold it on, so a total of 8 screws, 4 on each side, and then the leaf is held on with 2 screws. So I will stain the top, clear coat the top with polyurethane. There will be 2 coats of polyurethane. Then I'll remove the top, sand the skirt, sand the legs, and paint them separately. That way I don't have to worry about getting paint or stain on the wrong parts. The table will be stained with a Mission Oak Minwax stain. It is stain and polyurethane. This is not a one-step project. I just like the color of Mission Oak. Typically I'll get the satin, not the gloss. However, I had to get gloss because they were out of stock. We will use a tack cloth to remove the dust from the tabletop before we use the Mission Oak stain. Then we will do a light sand with 150 grit on top of the stain to remove any bumps. Then we will apply clear satin polyurethane, also Minwax, and in between each of these steps we will clean with a tack cloth. there will be 2 coats of polyurethane. I've got a separate brush for my stain and polyurethane. I use a different brush for each stain that I use in my projects. This is the most important thing, the tack cloth. Alright, the table's been fully stained. Now we need to do the next step of preparation before we add the clear coat. I use 220 grit sandpaper, and I'll just lightly run the sandpaper with the grain to remove any high spots in the stained surface. Alright, now that the light sand is done with 220 grit sandpaper, we need to remove the dust from the tabletop with a tack cloth. So once again, take my tack cloth, and this one's still very clean, and just wipe all the way down. Alright, the surface has been sanded and cleaned with the tack cloth in preparation for the most important step. That is going to be the clear coat. Now you always want to stir the clear coat. Do not shake. We do not want bubbles. And make sure that whatever you use to stir this does not have dust on it. If you have dust in the clear coat, it will cause bumps and it will not be smooth. What you want to do is get your brush saturated, and when you apply this, you want to start halfway, and you're just letting the clear coat sit on top, and you're not brushing it on, you're just laying the clear coat on. I'll go halfway down and then flip the brush and come the rest of the way. Now I'll usually take the brush and just let it drag the clear coat across the first row. Now that's extremely thin towards the end, so what I'll do is I'll dip the brush. I will come halfway on the left side and just let it pool and drag it. Flip the brush, drag it the rest of the way. Alright, so I have one row. There will be small little bubbles that will pop themselves when you use a 50-50 mix of polyurethane and mineral spirits. And you will get larger bubbles if you use straight polyurethane. So there's an important stroke in between the first and second row, in the third and fourth row, and so on. And I will show that to you. Alright, the most important stroke is this one. You just let the brush feather down, and what this does is it spreads the polyurethane and it will pop the little bubbles. Now I'll come halfway between my first and second stroke. And I won't feather this last row that I've left untouched until I lay the third row down. Once I apply a few rows of polyurethane, I'll come through and lightly brush the edges. So now we're about to prep the table for its second clear coat. It is smooth, but there are still some rough spots. The tabletop has 2 coats of polyurethane and it is perfectly smooth. After the second coat, I did take 220 grit sandpaper and just lightly knock off any of the bumps that were there. There weren't very many. And now it's perfectly smooth.